So, inclusive stakeholder governance. Democracy ideally means people affected by a decision play meaningful roles in making it, and that those closest to a situation take meaningful action to address it. So help full spectrum networked stakeholders who already play informed, if conflicted, roles in their shared areas of concern, manage their issue domains responsibly and wisely together. Okay, so stakeholder. This is an important concept, particularly for this pattern. And my sense of stakeholder, which I've embedded into this pattern, which is somewhat broader and more philosophical than other people's definitions. It's not the power players, although they are included. But in any given situation, who is involved, or who should be involved in order to have this situation, this realm of life, healthcare, governance, education, whatever, climate. Who is involved or should be involved to have a good outcome from this? That's a stakeholder. They're actors, they're being impacted by it, they have information or power that's relevant to the scene, they're involved. And this comes, the background of this is a sense that is covered in the universal participation pattern, that that any given scene is being played out with the engagement of lots of different entities and factors. And if that's true, then whatever problems are in the area, whatever issues or difficulties are characteristic of that issue or realm, they're being made. Those disturbing factors are being co-created by the entities that are involved. So what would happen if you could bring all those entities together to deal with that realm collaboratively, to share information, to share energies, share resources? If you could somehow help them work together to manage that domain, that's a form of governance. So this is, I learned, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I ran into 2 people over a period of a few weeks who pointed out to me that there's an emerging thing of many networks of stakeholders, multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale networks, where people are working together across those boundaries to deal with a particular issue domain. That's happening with the UN's UN's Sustainable Development Goals. In each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there are these networks coming together. So many of these multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale networks are coming together around each of the 17 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And there are regional multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale networks becoming interwoven, like in food systems. All the different players that are dealing with food at different levels and all that. Policymakers, people who are selling food, people who are growing food, people who are consuming food, blah, 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 blah. All that coming together to deal with the domain of food systems better. So there's these examples of this happening, and the leap that I was introduced to was, this is in fact a form of governance. Governments are playing a role in it because they are stakeholders, they are sectors, they have different scales. They're involved in this kind of effort, but it's much broader. And the different sectors have different roles to play. Government has a particular role to play. But this is, and part of the inquiry that is dancing with this is there's another definition of democracy, which is what we usually think of, which is we the people. It's like we the members of this community, the members of this city, the members of this state, the members of this nation, whatever, we citizens, active residents, are collectively deciding what happens. So there's these two different understandings and manifestations of democracy, and one of the things we're trying to do with the citizen stakeholder integration is one of the other patterns, is bring those together. But this pattern is about stakeholder governance, that particular vision of democracy. How do we have, number one, how do we include the diversity of stakeholders who are relevant to a particular issue domain? Healthcare. Who all is involved in healthcare, who should be making the decisions that govern healthcare? Food, who all involved in food systems should be involved in that? Climate, community security. It's all these different, what I'm calling issue domains here, that have many different players in it. Who are those players? We don't just want, we're dealing with security, we don't just want the policemen and the people who've been arrested. That's fine as a start, but what about all the other players? There's so many players in that system, and if you want to actually transform it and have it be able to evolve sensibly, you need to involve all of those players, or people who represent all those players, the different domains of those players. So that's what the word inclusive is about. And once you get the diversity there, you face the challenge you always face when you get diversity there, is they're different. They don't necessarily agree with each other. They don't necessarily know how to work together. They don't necessarily have the same sense of how the world works. And there are ways to help people who are that different work together. And many of the other patterns in this pattern language are about that, helping people who are very different from each other work together. So you want to include, and you want to enable them to work together, and you want them to collectively address this particular domain that they are all involved in, so that their actions become co-creative instead of mutually interfering, mutually destructive, and that applies to every single domain that there is. And then we add in the citizens. That's the other piece of the puzzle, which was really interesting to work with. But this thing has a vision of, if you could get the right diversity together of people who are involved in a domain, able to work together, then that issue will be governed in the best way that is possible for that domain to be governed.